Hello, everybody, welcome back. Thanks for tuning into another episode here in the series. My name is Dominic, and I'm the host of the Android Factory. Last episode, we went ahead and updated our profile fragment here to handle a little bit of a login procedure. So we can see we're signed out, and when we click the button, we are signed in. And this is super nice because the screen reacts to our user's authentication status. But as we can see, we don't really have any way of logging in other than clicking a particular button, which is obviously not a normal case. So I think we're going to just build this out with a couple edit texts and another button, and we'll be able to accept user feedback during this login process to really kind of finalize this login screen here, and we'll update some error handling along the way. So taking a look at our profile epoxy controller, which is what ends up running this entire screen. If our user is null, we have a signed out state, and then if we are non-null, we have a signed in state. And so those are the two different UIs that we end up seeing. So if we take a look at our signed out epoxy model, we see that it has that button here, and when they click the button, we sign the user in with hard-coded values for username and password. So we'll need to go ahead and go into this XML file, and we'll need to update this here. So give me a second, and I'll get everything up and running. Alright folks, and here we have it. So our layout has been updated. We have two text input layouts and then our button at the bottom. As you can see here, we have username and password, and then our button here, everything kind of constrained nicely with one another, so we have it all in the center of the screen. And our sign in button here is just aligned to the right, as I guess we would kind of expect here. So not too much in the button, but if we expand these other text input layouts, it kind of does get a little interesting. The text input layout is a wrapper around the text input edit text and allows us to kind of just apply certain styling to it, apply box backgrounds and stroke colors and all that kind of stuff. So it is really nice. We do have a vertical chain style here of packed, so you will see that all these elements are connected to one another via constraints here. And so when we have the chain style of packed, everything kind of gets squished together. If we really quickly remove that thing, we'll see it kind of has this very odd looking distribution, which is nice in certain cases but not for this one. And so if we just go ahead and set it to packed here, we have everything kind of squished in the middle. All of the white space is above and below everything that we've constrained. So that looks about it. I'm just going to go ahead and well, I can't run it real quick because this is now not available. So let's just go ahead and handle the signed out state. So instead of button, it's going to be the sign in button set on click listener on sign in, and we will say here. So we're running into some nullability issues because we have found ourselves in the case where there is nothing in that username edit text. So we're just going to very simply assign this to a variable here. I'm going to say toString, and then we're going to do basically the same thing here but for password. It's going to be pretty primitive error handling here. Password edit text. And so that is our information. We can simply just say, if our username is null or our password is null, then we can simply just say password edit password layout dot error equals both fields required, let's say, and then we could simply return. Otherwise, we can just simply say username and password. All right, so perfect. We have a little bit of error handling there internal to our signed out epoxy model. So as they click the button, we are validating that they have information supplied to us, and then if so, we can go ahead and send it off to the signed in. And so coming back to life here, we can go over to our sign-in screen. Look at that, huh? That looks like an actual sign-in screen now. You can go ahead and click. Okay, so definitely a little bit of a problem there. Definitely quite a problem there, actually. Okay, well, I will think about that as we solve it, but for this, for the sake of this demo here, we can just proceed. If we go ahead and click the sign in button here, we do not have anything. Why is that? All right, and so coming back to life here, we have to just update this. It is null or blank, not just is null, mainly because this stuff just returns an empty string here. So if we go ahead and, okay, so maybe we'll have to set an error state on the username so that we also get it, but we could say both fields required, you see that. And then if we were to do done, I believe it is, If we were to click this, we can see that we do get the login screen working. We do get all that information there. We do have, a little bit of saving of the state here, so we are going to have to clear certain things out, which will make a lot of sense. But also, let's see, we can take care of this both fields require, this error being basically removing the error in the non-null case. So we can just very easily maybe clear this by saying error equals null. And then on the actual model itself, what is it called? It's called unbind, I believe. Yep. Could I actually use the other unbind function that exists here, mainly because this one here passes in a view, but this one operates basically like how the bind function operates, just an extension function here on our binding itself, so we don't have to actually fetch the layout and the binding via the view and all that kind of stuff. So we can just very easily say, so let's see if we go ahead and just rerun that. This unbind is basically the same idea as like when the recycler view is recycling its views. So hopefully we should see that this this information inside these fields are removed. Done. If we go here and sign in, we see that it then actually the error went away very quickly. And if we log back out, we can see that we do have no information here, except our username does have focus. So I guess we can just simply go ahead and remove that as well. So username edit text dot clear focus, and we can do the same thing for our password edit text clear focus. And at that point, we should have everything in the signed out state, basic, let's call it, right, where there's this view where nothing is selected. So that is all good and well. So we do have quite a nasty, UI interaction here. Obviously, we're going to need to clean that up. But I think what's more important to clean up at this immediate moment is actually the error handling. Because if we see here, if we just pass in, some ridiculous information, we can click sign in and nothing happens, right? There's no feedback. The user might think this is actually broken in this case, and obviously that's not the situation. If we take a look at our view model, I believe. Yep, so it's up here. Username or password is incorrect here, and that is just in our original login response call, and we aren't really doing anything. All that we're doing is actually just logging that information out. So we would love to actually kind of, bubble that up to our user, and so they can actually see it on the screen here, see that something went wrong, and react accordingly. I think what this is going to cause us to do is take a look at our the way we have things structured here, right? So in the successful case of, let's go with the login, if the response is successful, then we go ahead and fetch our user Don. Again, this is just because of the API that we're working with, but I want to make it so that if you log in with any user, you sign in with the user Don. Unfortunately, you need to know the user's ID ahead of time that you want to fetch, and so that doesn't really help because username and password isn't enough to get the ID. But the point is that we actually update our application state with a user here, and so this is all that we have. We have just a nullable user. We don't necessarily have anything about some kind of error situation. So I'm going to go ahead and let's create like an auth state, let's call it. And this is going to have our nullable user. And then quite simply, it will also just have, an error string, which will just be a string that is, again, nullable. And instead of just holding our user, we're going to have an auth state object here, and we can just simply set that equal to an empty auth state. I just had a little bit of a better idea. If we go ahead and make this a sealed class, we can very easily update this to then be, let's say, data class authenticated. And this will have our user object at this point. And then there is a data class unauthenticated. And this will have an error string that is nullable, right? So we can go ahead and just remove that. We can actually say, instead of a class, we can just make a sealed interface here. And so we can have the definition or the data type here be auth state. However, we can't obviously create an instance. We don't have, especially with an interface, we don't have a constructor that we can actually call. So here we can just say auth state.unauthenticated. And I'm sorry, I forgot to extend our auth state here. So we're just going to simply do that. And now our error goes away. And so we say that our default value here is going to be the unauthenticated case, and in the authenticated case, we're going to have a user available, so we can very easily populate that. This is going to bode pretty well for us down the road because we can very easily like switch on this auth state. And so instead of saying, is user null or not null, we can say when our auth state is either authenticated or unauthenticated, and then handle, the different paths from there. So obviously our view model at this point is going to kind of blow up. But one thing we're going to do is very easily change our logged out state. So we're just going to say our auth state equals the unauthenticated state. We'll just go ahead and do that. This whole thing on another line so that we can kind of see, what's going on here quite easily. So that's pretty straightforward, right? A logout function, we set it to unauthenticated, everything's going to react. In the case here where we have a regular user at this point, we're going to go ahead and try to copy that, or update it, right? But as long as we have this idea of authenticated and unauthenticated, we can better handle body here, and specifically when it is null, or any of these other situations where we have, specific error cases or whatever the case is, right? So at this point here, we can very easily run our store.update. Instead of user, it's going to be our auth state, and this is going to equal this will again be unauthenticated. Let's go with our, error string is going to equal, I believe it needs to be this, which will read the actual error. This isn't really my favorite error handling, but again, this is the API that we're working with. We're also then going to call capitalize on this, so then we can very easily remove this log statement. And then we just have, so that's the response for our login call. That is the else branch when that has failed. We are going to update our store in either case. It's just a question of if our response body is null, right? So let's create an auth state ahead of time, right? And we can say if the body is null, then we are going to basically do the unauthenticated right here. And then else we are going to say, so then this will be the authenticated state where our user is going to equal our user mapper dot build from Don user response dot body. And at this point we know that it is non-null. And then we're simply just going to say our auth state equals our auth state. Could probably inline this. We can also say like return at update this copy here. Very, very nice. We no longer need this error handling, so we can remove that. Okay, so we made it on the nullable response body, and then we just have our work here. So very easily we can just trim this stuff up by saying dot parse error, and that kind of just cleans up a little bit of our logic there, right? So we have our response body parse error helper function along the way. We can very easily define our auth state here based upon whether this body is null or not. I think I could flip this around to use the let, and we won't have to bang this over here. But then otherwise, in the failed case when we log in, we do have just the unauthenticated state again, where we're parsing the error. Logout we've already covered. So yeah, this is coming together. Let me just flip this around so that we don't have to null something out or bang things down here, excuse me. All right, so we kind of Kotlinified this a tiny bit. So here we have our body $.let. In that non-null case, we do have the ability to go with the authenticated route and build from the body on our mapper. And then otherwise we have an Elvis operator that just puts us in the unauthenticated state, parsing out the error. Very, very, very straightforward. And then we just go ahead and return a copy of the state with that new stuff. So I think that's really about it. The only other case here is that we're just going to have to obviously update our fragment implementation here. So this we can clean up in a second. I do just want to update our epoxy implementation because we are no longer going to be looking at a particular user, but instead we're going to have an auth state here. It is not going to be null, so that's good. And we can just simply copy this right here. and we should not have a problem. So if it's not going to be that it can be null, we're going to instead just have, if data is our application state, auth state, unauthenticated, then we are in the unauthenticated state. Otherwise, we can very easily handle that we are in the authenticated state. So I don't know if this is smart enough to know there's only two options, authenticated and unauthenticated, but let's see. Data dot, what does this thing believe data is? It just thinks it's an auth state, so it doesn't have the ability to do that. Yeah, okay. Okay, so maybe instead we can very easily, so we can just say if our data is auth state authenticated, then it should be smart enough to do that cast for us. We can very easily just cut this out. No need for that else block, and then we just pass that in. And we can say data.user is what we need there. Lovely. So I know this might look a little weird. There's two if statements. You're like, Dom, it's possible that they're both satisfied. Realistically, no, it's not, right? Because the data that we're looking at is an auth state, and it's either going to be unauthenticated or it's going to be authenticated. It's impossible for them to be both. So yes, this code is going to run in both situations, but one of them is going to enter the if statement and the other one is not going to enter it. So we kind of have a little bit more of, again, following that declarative UI approach. I don't think anything else here needs to change. And then I think at the fragment level, we just need to handle this kind of stuff here. Yeah. Okay, folks. And so we just updated, we basically pushed these functions, get email, get greeting message into the auth state itself. So inside of our interface here, we've defined just a few functions that can say, if we are authenticated, then we can get the user's greeting message. Otherwise, we say sign in. And same idea with the email. We could fetch the email from the user. Otherwise, just empty string. So I think at this point, we have everything we need kind of built out and updated in order to properly function. So as we rerun it here, we should be able to see all the different edge cases. So if we go ahead and click sign in, yes, both fields are required here, so we have some information. The username we need is Donero, and the password we need is uidon, but if we go ahead and change that to 2 instead, we should... I don't think I'm doing anything with the error. Dang it, thought I had everything. Okay, so inside of our Epoxy controller, all we have here is a sign in, Lambda at this point. So we're going to go ahead and break that out into its own line there, and we're just going to say, error message equals our data dot error string. This is going to be a nullable string that we'll need to pass in here. Val error, what did I call it? I call it error message. Error message. And very simply, we will just say password layout dot error equals our error message, right? And sometimes it will be null, other times it won't be null, and it'll have some information for us there. So we're running things back up again. We have our Donero and then our uidon is the password, but if we put a 2 at the end of it, we try to sign in. Lovely. Username or password is incorrect. We're handling that from our backend, which is really, really wonderful. And then we can just simply go ahead, delete that, sign in, and now we can actually see that we've signed in with this user. Everything is all good. And when we go ahead and log back out, we are logged out. Looks like the focus here is being a little bit stubborn, so I do apologize for that. But I think the larger task to clean up is this one, because that's pretty nasty. So give me a second here. I think I just got to play with the recycler view, maybe this view up here. All right, folks, and just kind of changed around our, the height here for this element, so it's not as big, and instead we can kind of see everything now, and everything fits. Uidon is our thing, so we have our sign in, and then we can very easily see here that it kind of works at this point. So, I don't want to fight it too much because I'm not a designer, and the UI isn't necessarily the focus of this video. Instead, though, we are kind of handling our authentication state really, really nicely here. We've defined it very clearly as an interface, basically. We have the two different states. The benefit, too, of a data class here or sealed interface is that you don't need to handle nullability if you don't, if you don't require it, right? So when we are authenticated, we're gonna have a user. We no longer need to have a nullable user where we can, kind of handle both scenarios based on that, right? We have an authenticated state and an unauthenticated state, and both of them have the respective information. This string here being null is because there might not be an error string as far as like why you're unauthenticated, right? Like we default to that kind of state, so it's not necessarily wrong to have it be nullable at this point. But hopefully this does make sense. Hopefully you kind of see how we just modified some stuff in the view model here, kind of cleaned some things up in the fragment, and just kind of thought about, what it means to be authenticated or unauthenticated and how we want to accomplish that. So if you made it this far in the video, really appreciate a like. Subscribe if you are brand new and have enjoyed this. All of the code is in the GitHub linked below in the description. So feel free to pull it down and get all the information you need there to see it firsthand. And otherwise, that's about it for me, folks. Comment real fan in the comments if you made it this far. Catch you in the next one.